Now, the next thing that relates to time management and self-discipline is that you have to understand what the 80-20 rule is. The 80-20 rule was actually, you might say, configured or birthed by an Italian economist named Alfredo Pareto. And he looked around his country and saw that 80% of the wealth was held by 20% of the people. And he thought, that's interesting. And through the years, people have made that relationship to other areas of work. For instance, 80% of your revenue will probably come from 20% of your customers. So does that tell you where you're supposed to focus? And 80% of your complaints will probably come from 20% of your customers. So once again, if you can solve this 20%, the problems of this 20% of your customers, you've solved 80% of your problems. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, when you get to time management, 80% of the things you do through the day probably don't bring you the results you want. They don't move your career forward. It's the 20% that you want to focus on, the 20% of those high priorities. Now, I thought, 20%, I can be more effective than that. So I really worked hard, and I learned something. This is true, this 20-80 rule. If you try to be highly effective in 30, 40, 50%, then you're kind of getting burnout. And why? Because I learned that there's a phenomenon, and I like to call this the 20-20 rule, because there is your 20% that you have to focus on here. Then you have a 30% where this comes in. These are legitimate activities. This 20% up here has a lot of a lot of tasks that you have to do that support that 20% to get them done. And I wouldn't call them high A's, but they're very important. So they're legitimate activities that you have to do. And by the way, eating and sleeping falls into that legitimate category there. Then you have a 30% that is what I like to call frenetic behaviors. Frenetic behaviors are my time wasters. It's like, I wasn't quite organized on that project. I can't find this thing in my computer. I don't know. I guess I didn't put the right file name on it. And where did I lay that book? It's like all these things. And then, of course, in your time wasters or your frenetic behaviors, you also have people who waste your time, or meetings that go too long, or meetings that aren't effective. So that's a category that you can really work on to be more effective. Now, what I would say, you're wondering where that other 20% is, right? This is what I call the intangibles. Intangibles are things that you cannot put a dollar price on, because how can you assign a dollar amount to that extra time you give to help the customer get just what they want or to solve their problem? I had a young lady walk into my office one day, and she kind of slumped into the chair. And by the way, I could tell when her body framed the door, when she walked into the door, I could tell something was wrong. And she slumped into her chair, and she said, "Karla, I don't feel like I'm worth anything today." That's when you take the clock off the wall, take off your watch, and you sit and focus on helping that individual, that human being, in a heart-to-heart situation. So what I would bring to you today is that if you can focus on the 20% that make you highly effective and focus on the 20% that are intangibles, you're going to be fabulously successful, and you'll be very employable in today's world.